Can I just say how absolutely thrilled we are that CMI Women and the Women's Network Forum are coming together. It's going to be an incredibly exciting collaboration. We're deeply indebted to Her Royal Highness for suggesting that, and for Amanda and all of the members of the Women Network Forum for supporting it. And it's going to be a wonderful collaboration. So now I'm absolutely delighted to move to the next discussion of the conference. I have joining me on stage two incredibly accomplished women. I have Rachel Reeves, MP. She is the Shadow Chancellor, and as you know, has an incredible background in business herself, having been with the Bank of England and then subsequently also in the financial services industry. And I also am extremely proud to introduce Fiona Dawson, CBE, who is the president-elect of CMI. I've known Fiona for 3 decades. We were at Mars together. She was the most senior woman in Mars. She chaired the Women's Business Council, and she's now on the board of Lego, Marks and Spencer's. And I'm delighted that she's also our president-elect. So if I could welcome them both to the stage. Right, so you are both extremely accomplished professional women, and you've made it in what are, let's face it, still very traditionally male environments. Rachel, Parliament, banking, Bank of England, Fiona, the corporate world. Tell me, how did you deal with that, and what was your approach toward encouraging inclusion, and maybe dealing with some of the less savory behaviors you might have encountered along the way? If I could maybe start with you, Rachel.
Oh, thank you very much for having me here today and at the CMI Women's Conference. So I think I've always been in environments that are very male dominated. You mentioned politics and banking and financial services. When I was at school, I was a keen chess player, and I played competitively for quite a long time. And that was incredibly male dominated, much more than anything else that I've done. And I remember I must have been about 8 years old, and I was playing in a chess match, and I was playing a boy, and his friend came up and said, "Lucky you, you're playing a girl." Well, he wasn't saying that when I beat him. And I think from a very early age, I was in male-dominated environments, but did well in them. And it's never put me off. I guess I have always felt that I've got something to prove, not just for myself, but for all women. And if next year Labour win the next election, I will be the first ever female Chancellor of the Exchequer. In 800 years of Chancellors, there's never been a woman, and that's a glass ceiling I think deserves to be smashed.
Our audience obviously agrees with you. Fiona, what about your experiences?
I mean, it's such a shame that we have to have the first of still and the only still. You kind of think, and when people say we're done on the agenda, you clearly see, no, we've got still an awful long way to go. So yes, I mean, in many ways I was lucky. So I joined Mars in 1988, and this was the year of dynasty and shoulder pads and what have you. So the rules were incredibly clear. And as Anne will know, I've always been sort of quite a timid dresser. But I think what I did in those days was very much suppress any femininity I had. I wanted to fit in. I didn't want to stand out as a woman. I wanted to be judged on my own rights as a business leader as opposed to anything else. And the first thing I learned was it was really important to be respected and not liked. I was definitely a pleaser. I wanted, you know, to get on well in school, to get on well in uni. I wanted to make my parents proud, but you just can't do that in business. You've got to take tough decisions, but people need to respect you for those decisions. So that was the first thing. I guess the second thing I learned was resilience, actually. Sometimes it's a very, very lonely space, and you can't look for approval from others. Maybe if you're the only woman there, you're excluded from other activities. And so you learn to be quite self-motivated, if you like. And I think the other thing I learned then was to be courageous. So an example of that was many moons ago when I took over as sales director in the UK, the first female sales director in the UK. I just happened to stop. I'd love to say it was by forethought. I didn't play golf. I didn't do any of the other things that sales did with their customers. So I stopped playing golf, and because I didn't do it, but I stopped a lot of the activities. Now, I didn't say to the others that they didn't have to do it, but what really astounded me was particularly the younger male leaders didn't want to do some of the things. They didn't want to drink hard. They didn't want to go on these trips. They wanted to be with their families. And it made me realize, actually, I could use my femininity to pave a way, not just for women, but for men. And finally, and this is probably not a very good thing to say, but I think even through the difficult times, and we've got some difficult times at the moment, you can learn from it. And so the female role models in my business at the time were really tough women, and they never gave me the time of day. You know, they didn't mentor me, they didn't do anything, and I thought, I'm never going to do that. I feel so lonely. I want to learn. So I think I actually learned a lot along the way. I became a lot tougher, and I'm very grateful to it, actually.
But you didn't pull the ladder up.
I certainly didn't.
No.
That was the one thing I learned, is leave that ladder down and put your hand out to support others who want to come up it.
Yeah. Well, now, Rachel, you've spoken very openly about some of the policy initiatives that you find particularly important that will promote inclusivity. Things like dealing with childcare, things like closing the gender pay gap, which has been stuck for 6 years. I would love, and I'm sure our audience would love to hear, how do you actually plan to address those things?
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, the legislation on equal pay was 1970, and so we are 53 years later, and there is still a pay gap of around 15%. For women in their 50s, it is much higher than that, and it's lower amongst younger age groups. When does that pay gap open up? It is when women have children. And when children come along, that is when often men's careers take off and women stumble. And I think there's a whole range of reasons behind that. But one of them is the lack of access to good quality, affordable childcare. And as a result, a lot of women reduce their hours, don't take the promotion, take a job that is fits in with their caring responsibilities, but might not be their dream job. And that's just not the same so much for men. Now, I think there are also issues around how maternity and paternity leave are structured. What is the assumption that we make about who's going to take up those caring responsibilities? Because often when the child comes along, there's not much of a gap between what the man and the woman, if it is a man and a woman, earn. But because of the choices that are then made, that is when the gap opens up. And, you know, a lot of time when prime ministers and chancellors talk about productivity, and they're going to do an announcement about productivity, they put on their hard hat and their high-vis jacket and they go to the factory or the building site, because that is how you get productivity in the economy. I'm not sure about that. You know, of course we need good infrastructure, trains that run on time, that would be a great thing. But we also need some of those softer things,
Absolutely,
like good childcare, good older people's care, because what is the biggest barrier for a lot of women in the workplace? You know, it's not necessarily the hard infrastructure, it is that support for balancing work and family life. And I think you're right as well, Fiona, in saying that actually a lot of young men want this as well. You know, I've got 2 kids at primary school, and you know, when I was dropped off at school, you'd hardly see any dads doing the school drop off. That has really changed. Dads want this as well as mums, but it is mums in terms of the career that still tend to lose out. So look, I want to be the Chancellor that finally, 53 years later, starts to close that gender pay gap and also looks at the practical things that are needed. You know, when Barbara Castle brought forward that legislation in 1970, the issues were very different. It was about blatant discrimination, about paying women and men different amounts for the same job or jobs with the same skill. Today, it is much subtler reasons for why that pay gap still exists. But I am determined, whether it is about childcare, maternity and paternity rights, tackling issues around women and the menopause and dropping out of work then, as well as supporting the workplace. Some of those things that we need to do to keep our highly skilled women in the workforce so that we can get the most from the huge amount of investment that goes into women's talent, but is too often lost, so that men and women can have fulfilling lives at home as mothers and fathers, but also as at work, doing the jobs that they want to do and skilled and equipped to do. And I am absolutely convinced that a key thing for closing our productivity gap, as well as closing the gender pay gap, is investing in the childcare and older people's care, which keep women out of the workplace or keep them out of doing the jobs that are commensurate with their skills.
So you've touched on a number of really important points there that CMI are very central to CMI's belief. When productivity is talked about, it's about infrastructure, it's about investment in broadband, it's about manufacturing and creating, HS2, billions of pounds spent on that. You seem to be saying that actually we could divert some of that to spending it on investing in childcare, investing in getting more opportunities for women to get promoted, and in management and leadership. I mean, one of the key things, Fiona, do you think that productivity and growth are boosted by some of these softer things, or what's your view as a business person?
100%. I mean, I don't actually think that. I think there's a real danger with, and I know why you say it on, around softer and harder things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and it's been proven time and time again. I think people tune out some of the data, some of the facts. They go, oh yeah, we kind of know all of this, but the facts are clear. And in addition to this, Rachel, as you'll know only too well, it's not just women stepping back in terms of their careers at childbearing years, but those financial decisions they take then lead to the massive pension gap that we're seeing now. And that is an enormous travesty. And it's not shared with women. If you decided, which women may well choose to do, you need to be very aware that this is going to be the implication when you hit older ages as well. So they very, very much go hand in hand. I think it's very easy to say we'll put this on a back burner because we need to focus on growth and productivity, but it's only by harnessing the totality of your workforce. And to lose women at these crucial stages of their careers, frankly, is not a return being very hard-nosed on your investment in the talent.
Well, absolutely. And as you say, they're not, soft and hard is the wrong characterization, because actually those things, good management and leadership, are hard to do.
Very.
And yet, when you look at the productivity gap in this country, about half of it is down to management and leadership. So Rachel, are you saying, assuming that you agree with that investing in better management and leadership and driving better productivity through human capital investment should be a key political aim or policy aim?
Yeah, so I think, if you look at our current economic performance, it's clearly not good enough. This year we're forecast to have the slowest growth and the highest inflation in the G7. And I think apart from Russia, we're the only OECD country to still be smaller than we were before the pandemic. This is not a good enough performance. And a line behind a lot of that is this productivity challenge that, a lot of countries since the financial crisis 13, 15 years ago, productivity has slowed down, but it has slowed down more in the UK than it has pretty much anywhere else. And without that productivity growth, it is very difficult to have economic growth. And you're absolutely right that the reasons behind that are multifaceted, but good management and leadership is really important. People being able to take up those jobs is very important. I'm not underestimating things like good transport and good broadband, especially when more people want to work from home. It is really, really essential that we have that. And actually, if you want to have growth and prosperity spread across the UK, as I do, then it is really important that it's not just the cities that have that good connectivity, but that you can work and be productive in all parts of the UK. So all of these things are important, and we've got to turbocharge them. I go around the country and I meet people and I meet businesses who've got no end of ambition for themselves and their families and the businesses they run or work in, and yet we're not achieving our full potential. I think that only London, Aberdeen and Bristol have gross value added higher than the national average. That means that vast swathes of the country are not making the contribution that I know that they can and they should be making. And if you look at what other countries around the world are doing to seize some of the new opportunities, for example, in some of the low carbon industries of the future or in automation and digitization, look what the US is doing with the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act. You know, businesses say to me, if you've got a choice between investing in the US or investing in the UK, I'm afraid at the moment it's a no-brainer. You know, the deeper capital markets as well as the government support for those growing industries means investment in the US makes sense in a way that it's not in the UK. Now, at a time of huge change, we've got to have a business and government partnership to see some of these big opportunities that are out there for the taking. And I don't want to find ourselves in 30 years' time looking back and wondering why we are importing all of our vehicles because we didn't make the batteries here, why we are importing our steels because we didn't move to green steel, why we're importing our gas because we didn't invest in hydrogen today. You know, there are massive opportunities out there, and it requires, I think, like never before, a real partnership between government and business, because most of these big changes can only happen through a partnership. If you look at things like the vaccine, for example, it wasn't just in the space of a year that the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine was created. It was through decades of government investment in basic research and science at our great universities, and then partnership between those universities and business that meant when it was needed, they were there to step up to the challenge. And I think we should think about some of the other challenges that we face today, whether it is getting to net zero or managing the transition to a more automated and digitized economy and society. We should see those challenges in the same way that we faced into the pandemic of almost an emergency situation where we have to work together to take advantage of the opportunities and to meet the challenge that's staring us in our face.
Of course, one of the things that you've referenced in that summary, which of course is a great summary, is the emergence of new skills. And of course, what we know through CMI's work at the moment, we just simply don't have inclusivity when it comes to leadership and management, when it comes to creating and filling the demand for green energy and all of the skills that will drive future growth. Fiona, do you think that businesses faced with the cost of living crisis really do understand the degree to which, firstly, they need to invest in these skills? The UK invests less than other OECD countries. And secondly, the need to actually harness the inclusivity argument for growth.
So, you know, business is obviously a very broad spectrum. Do all businesses get it? No, they don't. What they will do is cut back enormously. Now, some of them will need to do it for short-term reasons. However, we know that the good businesses, the successful businesses, have to invest behind the future. You know, I'm very lucky to have worked with businesses like Mars, like Lego, like M&S, who have been around for many, many years. And they have faced other challenges in the past. What you need to do is you need to reinvent your business model as you go forward. And that does require, from a board point of view, making sure you've got the right capital allocation. And I think most investors really understand that as well. What they're looking for is a long-term return, not just a short-term return. In terms of inclusivity, I mean, if you look at the reasons from a pure metric perspective for gender equality, you know, 14% are down to occupational segregation. So women not doing the jobs that men are doing. And 21% are down to industrial segregation. So they're not in the industries that men are in. So if we're going to sort out the gender pay gap, we've got to sort out those two things as well. So do all businesses get it? Probably not. Do the good businesses get it? Absolutely.
Yeah, and again, the evidence is there that the businesses that get it grow more.
Yes.
But you mentioned, both of you have mentioned the importance of business and government partnership. So if I ask, what do you think we need to do differently in terms of how business and government are working together? What would you like to see happen? Maybe ask Rachel first and then Fiona.
Yes, so I think you often sort of expect sort of party political politicians to sort of criticise what the current government are doing. That could do plenty of that. But one thing that Theresa May did when Greg Clark was Secretary of State for Business was to pull together an industrial strategy. And it was really, really good. And it was good because, and I was chair of the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Select Committee at the time, the cross-party committee. And we saw a lot of really positive things in that. But it survived a couple of years. And then it was scrapped for reasons beyond my comprehension by Boris Johnson. And that was a real mistake because it had cross-party support, it had business support, because it had been written by government and business working together, spotting opportunities, areas where there's a big opportunity for growth, but also looking at some of those sort of fundamental sectors of the economy, things that I call the everyday economy, without which the rest of society can't function. Actually, that includes things like education and childcare. It includes haulage and distribution, which when that doesn't function, we see the implications in our shops and the high streets, etc., in terms of inflation. So I want a modern industrial strategy which is pulled together by government and business working together. And everyone's got their different parts to play in that. You know, you're not going to magic growth by pulling levers in Westminster and Whitehall. It's up to business to create jobs and prosperity, but it's up to government to provide the framework to encourage businesses to make those choices to invest here in the UK and create those opportunities. And so that's what I mean by a partnership approach. You know, a strategy doesn't really exist unless it's written down, and if there are without clear goals and ambitions. And I think that the industrial strategy that Theresa May and Greg Clark built with business is a pretty good starting point.
So Fiona, do you agree with that? Or you...
Wholeheartedly, actually, I do. And at the very same time, you then had groups such as the Women's Business Council, which is sponsored by government but led by business, was put in place to work in partnership. And I think that degree of partnership is a two-way street. So I think, government listening to business with a very open mind of what needs to happen, but also as businesses, we need to make sure we also come with solutions, not just asks the whole time. So I think working in partnership against a very, very clear and articulate industrial strategy is absolutely top of the priority list.
So I'm going to take some questions from the audience, but before I do, I have to ask, it's 2023, culture in organizations, behavior in organizations. Again, at CMI, we say behavior is as important as technical competence. It's been in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. What do we need to do in 2023 to stop this stuff from happening? What do you think, Rachel?
I mean, it does exist in business. Politics is never out of the news when it comes to some of these scandals, and so I don't think politicians are in a place to lecture businesses about what needs to be done. I do think more women at the top of organisations is a good thing for setting the culture. I mean, some of those things, it may sound small, but actually, women being excluded and different people being excluded from the places where the decisions are really made are really big things. I mean, I've seen culture change a lot. When I worked at the Bank of England, when I worked in financial services, I don't think culture was what it should have been. If you look at politics, when I was born 40 odd years ago, there were 19 women in Parliament out of 650 MPs, 19. Today, there are more than 220 women in Parliament. That has changed the culture in Westminster, and it means some of these things are called out in a way that they weren't in the past, but there's still an awful long way to go. It's still only a third of MPs are women, so twice as many men than women. There are still lots of things where there's never been a first, lots of other jobs where there's only ever been one woman. It's not job done. Oh, we've had one woman, so we don't have to worry about that anymore. Betty Boothroyd died in February this year, the first woman speaker, the only woman speaker of the House of Commons. So culture needs to change. I've always felt very much that you can't be what you can't see. That thing you said, Fiona, about role models. Role models are really important for all of us, subconsciously and consciously. You know, I remember in 1997 when loads of women entered Parliament for the first time, and it was the first time I looked at politics and thought, well, maybe that is something that one day I could do, because you suddenly saw people who looked like you. You know, 1987 was the first time you had Black and Asian MPs in Parliament. I mean, that is shocking, really. But I think those culture things and having women and people from all different backgrounds in positions of leadership changes the way that organisations run and changes your perception of who they are run for.
And perhaps changes behaviours. But Fiona, do you agree more women at the top? Or are there other things that need to be done?
Totally. I think one of the things that we need to make sure that we do as leaders, as businesses, is to create companies that have strong psychological safety, where you feel very safe in being able to speak out. I saw that myself with regards to Black Lives Matter, where I saw a lot of our employees or associates, as we will call them, who felt they couldn't bring their true selves to work. And, you know, even as a woman leader, you've got to be very careful you don't preach, because individuals are individuals. And so what you've got to keep doing is keep listening, make sure that you're talking to people at all levels in your organization, and you're shining a light into the dark corners for those who don't feel they've got a voice and certainly don't believe they're going to be listened to.
I think that's a great place to open it up. We have time for just a couple of questions from the audience. I'm sure we have some. I don't know if we have a microphone or we're asking you. We do. This lady right here.
They are comfy, those chairs. Hello, my name's Claire Marie Boggiano, and I'm from Manchester today, so I'm representing Manchester with my Manchester accent. I was really encouraged to hear you talk about the care economy. I was at another conference last week in Geneva, and somebody used the term the purple economy to talk about care and education and that wider. And I think it's a real true part of our infrastructure. My background's engineering, so I get the technical infrastructure, but I do think it's nearly more important if we can set up the care economy. I also work in leadership, and my question is around, you know, I think the mess that we are in as a world, as an economy, as a country, and some of our businesses is to do with the leadership that has got us here. And we just need a different type of leadership going forward. And I'm wondering if you can say a little bit more about what you think that means for us as individuals, for organizations, as a country. You know, what does that leadership look like going forward?
Great question. Rachel?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that question, Claire. You know, I still, despite all the challenges, I still feel really optimistic about the possibilities ahead of us, especially at a time of big change. But we are not fulfilling our potential as a country, and we are falling behind in what I think is a global race for the jobs and industries of the future. I've said that under a Labour government, we want to achieve for the UK the highest sustained growth in the G7 with good jobs and productivity growth in all parts of the country. And I think that is absolutely achievable because we do have so much potential. And if you look at the areas of growth, whether it's in life sciences, green technology, in so many parts of the economy, we're already leading in these sectors, and we have great university research. I did some work last year with Jim O'Neill about how to make Britain the best place to start and grow a business. We need greater access to capital and finance for some of those startup and scale up businesses, but we also need much more stability from government and as a country. And one of the things that Anne and Fiona and me were talking about before we came out, you know, in politics at the moment, so many business leaders say to me that, you know, you get a new incoming Secretary of State, you write them a letter, and by the time you get a reply, it's from a different Secretary of State because it's changed again. I've got a friend who about a year and a half ago was asked to go on a government panel and government review, and she said since then there's been 3 different Secretaries of State. The second and the third one don't really know why the first one commissioned the review in the first place, and it's now been delegated to a junior minister who just wants the review to finish so she doesn't have to go to another meeting of it. And this is no way to run government and run the country. And we do need greater stability, a sense of mission again. What is the mission of our country and of the government? What are we trying to achieve? Because I think if there was a greater sense of purpose, then everybody could get behind it, know what role they have to play in it, whether that is a business leader, as someone working for an organisation, someone in academia, in the voluntary sector. But at the moment, apart from just sort of, muddling through, I'm not really sure what the mission is.
Well, that's
for several years, and that is what Keir Starmer has spoken about, a mission-led government, and the first of those missions to grow the economy, because unless you grow the economy, you're not going to have those good jobs paying decent wages, and frankly, you're not going to have the money for the public services, whether that is our schools, our hospitals, our transport infrastructure, and all the rest of it. So getting that growth through that partnership approach, I think it's got to be the absolute central mission of the next government.
So more purpose, longer termism, greater continuity, key aspects of leadership to drive growth, and of course, also greater inclusivity. We have time for one very short question, if we have one. Yes, over there. Kate.
It's wonderful hearing how important childcare is going to be as a policy priority. I think the UK has the highest cost of childcare in Europe. Can you tell us more about how that policy is going to take shape, given that the Treasury has pretty finite resources?
Yes, so my colleague Bridget Phillipson, who's the Shadow Education Secretary, is developing our thinking on that. And I think that it's got to focus on the supply side as well as the demand side, because the recent government announcements, which include more money, which is very welcome, all focus on increasing demand for childcare. One of the big challenges that I think that working parents face is that the supply has dried up. And there are some parts of the country where it's almost impossible to get a nursery place for your child. But also recognising that childcare doesn't stop when a child goes to school. In fact, some of the biggest challenges are at that point when you need the wraparound care before and after school. So the breakfast clubs, the after school clubs, and not just babysitting services, but something that will stimulate your child so that you feel confident leaving your child in that environment. And I think one of the things that the last Labour government did really well was the development of Sure Start and children's centres, because they were about providing great childcare, but also about helping women, mothers back into work and giving them the skills that they need to succeed as well. So we will go into the next election definitely with an ambitious plan around childcare beyond just the earliest years, but looking through the whole life of a child and also of a working parent. So you've got a childcare system that is affordable, flexible, because so many jobs now have flexible hours that often childcare settings aren't able to provide for, but also childcare that is stimulating for young people so that they arrive at school ready for that learning environment and have those opportunities through childcare to develop skills so that parents know that their child is well catered for in those settings. So we'll be setting those out as we go into the election, but I hope you've heard from what I've said today that both in terms of the economy and in terms of life chances for young people, I think that those policies are absolutely essential for a growing economy and a fair and inclusive economy as well.
And I'm sure that everybody here will find those words very welcome and very important. I would like to thank both Rachel and Fiona for their time and brilliant answers to some very pertinent questions. Can you join me in thanking them in the usual way? And I'm sorry we ran out of time. I'm sure many others have many more questions. I also would like to take this opportunity, because she must also depart, to thank our wonderful, wonderful patron, Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of Edinburgh, for sharing a part of this conference with us today, and for overseeing the wonderful coming together of the Women's Network Forum and CMI Women. Thank you so much, Your Royal Highness.